Let's understand iterators and iterables in JavaScript. An iterator is an object that provides a standard way to access the elements of a data structure sequentially one at a time. Here, the data structure can be any data structure that stores a collection of values. Let's look at some examples to understand the problem that iterators solve. Here we have an array of 4 elements and we will use a for loop to access each of the element. This way we can simply access each of the element of the array. Now if you execute this, you can see that we are able to access each element of the array. Now let's use a string. Here I have a string and let's use the same way to access each character of the string. Let's comment this and now see the output. You can see that here also we are able to access each characters of the string with a for loop. Now let's try to access all the elements of a set and a map. So let me create a set. Okay. Now the set is created. Now think about this. Can we access all the elements of the set the same way we accessed the array and string just by using a for loop? It is not possible because array and string in JavaScript allows us the indexed access. Okay, whereas set is implemented differently. So we cannot access the elements of a set using index. So this method is not possible when it comes to set. Now let's consider the case of a map. And let's add two properties to the map using the set function. Now let's try to print the set and the map. Let me comment this and see the output. You can see that the set is having 4 elements and the map is having 2 properties, first name and last name, first name having the value John and last name having the value Doe. So we cannot access each of the elements of the set and this map using a normal for loop because the implementation is different. There is no indexed access possible for these two data structures. This is the problem. Before iterators, there is no standard way to access the elements of a data structure sequentially. Now, instead of a for loop, let's just try to use the for of loop of a JavaScript. So you might be familiar with the for of loop. So in the first case, we have an array and I'm changing this for loop to for of loop. And I'm trying to print the values. So if you see, we can access each element of the array using the for of loop. Let's try the same with string. So we have a string here. Let me comment this. And here I'm going to change ch of str. Save this. Okay, this ch. Okay. Here also we are able to access each character of the string using the for of loop. Now what about map and set? Let's use a for of loop to access the values of a set first. So we have a set here and let's use a for of loop. You can see that here also we are able to access the elements of a set. With a normal for loop, it wasn't possible, but with for of loop, it is possible. And finally, let's try the same for map as well. I'm changing this to map. You can see that we have 2 elements and the first element is an array and the first element inside the array is the field and the second element is the value. So we have 2 fields, first name and last name. The values are John and Doe. So with a for of loop, we are able to access all the elements of a map as well. So here you can see that we have 4 different data structure and its implementation is also different. But with for of loop, we are able to access all the elements of those data structures. This is possible because each of that data structure is connected to an iterator object. Okay. Now let's try to understand the iterator protocol. So the iterator protocol says an object is said to be iterator when it is having a method called next and it returns another object having two properties, value and done. So let me create a simple iterator object to understand it better. So this is a simple iterator object, and you can see that the object is having a method called next, and that method is returning another object. There, the value field is having a value 1, and done field is having a value false. So here value field represents the next value in the sequence, and done fields represent do we have any values left in the sequence. So here in this case, done false means we have more values to come. Now let's create an actual iterator having three values in the sequence. Here is a simple iterator having three values. You can see that inside the iterator we have a field count with its initial value as 0, and when we call the next, it checks the current value of the count, and if it is greater than or equal to 3, that means the sequence is over. So we are returning an object where done is true, and you can see that I'm not passing the value explicitly as undefined. It is not required to pass because it's undefined. So if you try to access the value property of this object, which will be undefined. Okay, so this is fine. We don't have to pass a value as undefined, but even if you pass it, there is no issues. Okay, now if the value of the current is um, less than 3, then we will return this object where value will be the current value and done will be false, and then we increment the value of the count by 1. Now let's use this iterator. So we can call the next method to get the next value. So, so I'm calling iterator.next here, and let's see the output. And you can see that value is 0 and done is false. So done false means we have more elements to come. So let's call it again. Save this. And the next value is 1 and done is again false, which means we have again more values. Now we have value 2, done false. So here you can see that there is no value field, which means value is undefined. So done true means the sequence is over. So now if we call this multiple time, we will always get this object because its internal state, the count has changed, count's value has changed. Now this condition is true and it always returns this object. You can see that done is true in all these cases. So this is all about the iterator object and the iterator protocol. Now the problem is how do JavaScript obtain the iterator object from each of these data structures? So there should be some way of connection from the data structure to the iterator object. That's when the iterable protocol comes. So let's understand the iterable protocol. The iterable protocol says an object is said to be iterable if it is having a method with the name symbol.iterator, and that method should return a valid iterator object. Okay, so let's create a simple iterable object and understand this better. So in this example, you can see that we have an object, and inside that object we have a method, and the name of the method is the value of symbol.iterator. So symbol.iterator is a predefined constant. Now inside this method, you can see that it returns an object, and that object is having a next method, which means this object is an iterator. So what is the iterable protocol says? The iterable protocol says the object must have a method with the name symbol.iterator, and that method should return a valid iterator object. So this is an iterable object here. Now, whenever we need to access the iterator of an iterable object, we can simply call this method, and this method returns the iterator objects. So this is the way the iterator object is connected to the data structure. Okay, so let's use this iterable object. So first we need to get the iterator object from this iterable object. So for that, I can call iterable of symbol.iterator. So this way, if I call symbol.iterator method of this iterable object, it will return a new iterator object. Now, using this iterator object, we can access the values sequentially. So how do we do that? We can use the next function. So here I'm just logging by calling the next method of this iterator. You can see that the value is 0, done is false. Now we can repeat this. So the value is 1, done false, which means we have more elements, and again values 2, done false. Now you can see that after value became 2, then when we call the next method, it always returns done true, and the value is undefined in these objects. So if you call the next method of this iterator, again, it won't give you the value. The value will be undefined. But you can always create a new iterator. So it2 and iterable of symbol.iterator. So now this returns a new iterator. So this is different object and this is a different object. Okay. Now let's copy this and use the same. Okay. Now instead of it here, we can give it2. Okay. Now save this. Oh, sorry. This has to be outside. Okay. We can see that. So this is till this done. This is for the first iterator. So value 0, 1, 2. After that, done is true. And this is for the second iterator. Again, it starts from value 0, 1, 2, then done is true and value is false. Right? So whenever we need a new iterator, we can just call the symbol.iterator method. Now let's do an experiment. Let's use a for of loop with this iterable object. So for const el of iterable, and let's print the el. You can see that 0, 1, and 2 is printed. So how does for of loop work with this object? So internally, the for of loop accesses the symbol.iterator method of the given object. Okay, so since this is an iterable object, it have the symbol.iterator method, and it calls this and it receives this iterator object, and on each iteration it calls the next method to get the next value, and the loop exits when the done property becomes true. Okay, so if you just write step by step what happens with for of loop, it first calls the symbol.iterator of that method, then on each iteration it calls the next method, and when if the done field is true, the loop is terminated. So this is how internally the for of loop works. Okay, so if you just if you want to write this with a normal loop, it would be something like this. So what's the first step? We have to call the symbol.iterator method of the iterable. So const iterable dot symbol.iterator. So we received the iterator in this variable. Now while true, so inside the body of the loop, we have to call the next method. Const um, we can just destructure. So, when we call the next method, it returns an object, and the object we are accessing the value and done property. So here I'm destructuring these two values. So I'm calling next. So it returns an object. From that object, we can get the value and done. And done, if done is true, then we should break the loop. Otherwise, we should. So we were trying to log, right, with the for of loop. So we can just log here, console log the value. Execute this. You can see that 0, 1, 2 is printed. So this is how the for of loop works internally. When we used the for of loop with array, string, map, and set, we were able to access the values. It was possible because all those objects had a symbol.iterator method inside. So when we were using the for of loop, it internally first calls the symbol.iterator method and it returns the iterator object. And on each iteration, it calls the next method to get the next value. And when the done property is true, the loop is terminated. Okay, now let's try to use a normal plain object with for of loop. So here, let me clear this. I'm creating a normal object. Okay, now let's use a for of loop with this object. Now if you execute this, and let's see the output, you can see that it throws an error. It says obj is not iterable. So this is it. Whenever we use a for of loop, it internally checks whether that object is having symbol.iterator. Okay, if the object is not having the method symbol.iterator, which means if the object is not iterable, then for of loop does not work because the for of loop internally needs this method and this iterator object to work. Okay, so that's why this plain object is not working with it. So when it comes to array, string, map, and set, JavaScript already predefined the symbol.iterator method inside it. But when it comes to plain object, they are not iterable. But we can add custom iterable inside it, just like this object. So this object is a plain JavaScript object, and we added that method inside, making this object an iterable object. Now let's try to access the symbol.iterator method of an array. So I can create an array and we can access the symbol.iterator of this array. And when we call this, it will return a new array iterator. So we can store it into this variable. Now let's call the next method of this and we can log it. Save this and see the output. You can see that value is 1, none is false. Now let's repeatedly call this. So we get 1, 2, 3, then the value is undefined in each case and the done property is true. We can do one experiment. We can try to modify the symbol.iterator behavior of this array instance. So we created the array and then we can modify it. So array of symbol.iterator function. Okay. Now here it returns an iterator. Return an object having next. Okay. So we can create one variable for accessing the current index. And we can get the array instance from this. So this. Because if you access this inside this next method, we calls the next method with this object, right? So if you access this inside this method, that this points to this object. But we need the array. For that, we have to access this outside and gets the array into this variable. Now here, if index greater than or equal to length, we should return value. No, we should return done true. Okay. If that's not the case, we should return an object having value as array of index, and we have to increment the index, and done is false. Okay, so this is the original behavior. Okay, let's keep it this way and just execute this and see what it prints. So same, you can see that now the value undefined is not there, it's only done true. So because like we modified the symbol.iterator method of this array instance, now after this it will use this modified function. Okay, so we are trying to reproduce the original behavior here, and let's add one console.log inside this next method. So here it will be, yeah, next is called. So whenever we call the next method, each time it will get this log printed. So you can see that next is called, then we get this value. Each time we get the next is called log. Now, instead of calling the or getting the iterator directly, let's use a for of loop. So you can see that next is called is being printed 4 times. So from this, we understand that whenever we use a for of loop, it internally calls the symbol.iterator of that object, and on each iteration, it calls the next method, and when the done property is true, the loop is terminated. Now let's explore an important application of iterator object. So using iterators and iterables, we can generate infinite sequence. Okay, so let's create an example. So in this simple iterable object, we have symbol.iterator method, and inside we have a variable id with value 0, and it returns an iterator, and whenever we call the next method, it always returns an object with a new value. Okay, and we just give the current value, and then we increment the value, and the done is false. So this way we can generate a unique ID whenever we want. Okay, so let's just use this. So we get the iterator here, and we can just call it.next. So here we get value 0 and done false. So let's repeat this multiple times. So you can see that each time it gets you a new value, and internally the value of the ID is incremented. You can see that this next method returns an object with done as false always. So which means the sequence is never ending. So whenever we need a new value, we can call this next method of that iterator. It will give you a new value. But if you use this iterable with a for of loop, it will go to an infinite loop because done is always false. Okay. Now let's understand the ES6 spread and rest operator connected with the iterator behavior. So whenever we use array, spread, and rest operator, it internally uses the iterator behavior. For example, I have an array here. I'm creating a new array. And here A and B. And I'm using the spread operator and giving the first array. So this is working only because this value is an iterable object. Okay, so you can see that this is an array, and inside an array we are using spread operator, and the value is here an array which is an iterable. So this is working only because this is an iterable. Now let's log the array. can see that A, B, then 1, 2, 3. Okay, now let's use, instead of an array, let's use a string. Okay, so here also it will work just fine because this is an iterable. So you can see the output A, B, then HELLO. Okay, now let's use a set. New set. Let's give S E T T. Okay, save this. You can see that A B S E T. Okay, so inside an array, if you use the spread operator, then the value should be an iterable. Let's try to use a plain object. Okay, so here I'm trying to use the spread operator with a plain object inside an array. You can see that type error, object is not iterable. Okay, so we need an iterable for this. So this is the same case with rest operator as well. Now you will probably get a doubt then how object spreading and object rest operator is working, because object is not an iterable. How it is working? So whenever we use the spread operator inside an object, it is not using the symbol dot iterator, or it is not checking whether that is an iterable object. So what I mean by that, let's create an example. So we have an object with the two fields A and B with the values 1 and 2. I'm creating a new object and I'm using the spread operator, and I'm adding a third property C with the value 3. Okay, so here the syntax is same in both cases, but where we are using the syntax. Here it is using inside an array. Here we are using it inside the object. Even though syntactically these are same, it is having a great abstraction. It is hiding the internal behavior. Here it uses symbol.iterator. Here it is not using, or here it is not checking whether this object is iterable. Okay. Now the behavior here is it takes all the enumerable properties of that object and it copies to this object. Now what is enumerable properties? An object can have different type of properties. One of them is enumerable properties, which means if you ever iterate over an object and if you are able to access the values, those values are enumerable, which means we cannot access all properties when we iterate over an object. Okay, there is non-enumerable properties inside an object. For example, all those prototype values are non-enumerable. So whenever we use the spread operator inside an object, it gets all the enumerable properties and it copies the property value to this outer object. Now inside an array, if you use the spread operator, it internally calls the symbol.iterator and then calls the next method to get the value and then copies it to the outer array. So there is a clear difference. Now let's do a fun experiment here. Now let's log this obj2. So here I need to change this. Let me clear this. You can see that A1, B2, and C3. Okay. Now let's make this object iterable. Okay, now this is an iterable. We have to return an iterator. Okay. So we just added the same iterator behavior that we tried earlier. Just a count, a sequence of three numbers, 0, 1, 2. And when it becomes 3 or more, it will give you done true. So now this is an iterable object. Okay. And let's see what output we will get here. So here we are creating a new object and we are using the spread operator to this object, and let's see the value. So you can see that A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and we have the extra symbol.iterator method. So from this, you can see that it is not using this method when we use the spread operator inside our object. It simply takes all the enumerable properties of the object. Here in this case, A is enumerable, B is enumerable, and even this method is also enumerable. So these three things are copied to this original object. Okay, now let's try the earlier behavior. So we had an array, right? So let's create an array and let's give A, B, and now we can use the spread operator with this object. Okay, yeah, we give this object. Now let's try to print the array. You can see that we get A, B, 0, 1, 2. We didn't get an error because this is now an iterable. Now we are using spread operator inside an array, and internally it uses this method, and it calls the next method and gets the value and copy the value to this array. Okay. Now what happens if you just use, so we know array is also object. So let's create an object. So here obj2, instead of this, let's spread this array here. Okay, so array and C3. Now let's see the output. See, 0 is the field and the value is A, and 1 is the field and the value is B, and C is the field and the value is 3. So this so this C come from here, and C, this is an object, and we are using spread operator to an array. Okay, even though this is an iterable here, it won't use the iterator behavior because we are spreading inside an object. We are copying the values inside an object. Now this is considered as a normal object with field and value. So here the field is just the index. So 0 is having A, 1 is having B. That is why here we are getting 0A, 1B. So we just covered iterators and iterator protocol, iterables and iterable protocols. Now when it comes to creation of iterable objects, it is not always easy. So there is a better way to create iterables and iterators using generator function, or generator function is introduced just to make iterables and iterators easy. So we will be looking generator functions in the coming videos. I hope you understand everything about iterators and iterables from this video, and thank you for watching.